In this video, I'm going to tell you 5 things that you should never, ever do on stage. Hey, and welcome to Music Space, where we help working musicians just like you learn how to quickly and easily make a living with your craft. So if you're new here to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. That way you'll be notified when new videos are uploaded. So there are a lot of things that musicians do on stage that are really counterproductive, unprofessional, and really make the band look bad and make you look bad in a lot of ways. And most of these things are really just unnecessary, and a lot of them are just bad habits that you've picked up over time and haven't corrected. And one of these things is fiddling with your instrument during the song or while the performance is going on. And this is absolutely crazy, and drummers are really notorious for this. This whole fiddling with your instrument and stopping to tune your head in the middle of a song, playing with one hand and trying to tune with the other, or just fiddling with the knobs on your keyboard and things like that. Just doing that, what are you doing? And a lot of musicians who can control their mix on stage, who have mixers or who control them with iPads or phones, sit there and just fiddle with that stuff during songs and pretty much throughout the whole gig. And I'm like, what are you doing? It seems like the more gadgets that we tend to get on stage these days, the more things that people start to fiddle with and just mess with throughout the whole show. You got to make sure that whatever adjusting and fiddling that you need to do with your instruments, that you do it ahead of time before the show starts. That's why one important thing is to get to gigs on time, but that's another story. But again, all of that stuff should be handled before time and during sound check. You should get your mix straight and all of that kind of stuff during sound check. Don't wait till the show starts to start fiddling with all of that stuff during the show. And that leads me to the next thing, which is you shouldn't be getting distracted while you're on stage. So again, as I stated, there's a lot of things on stage nowadays, a lot of technology and things like that that get our attention, that distract us from focusing on the music, focusing on the show, focusing on playing the music correctly and things like that. Now, let me be clear about all of this stuff. There are times and reasons for things like that, for getting distracted. Emergencies and things like that happen all of the time. And, even non-emergencies sometimes warrant certain types of distraction. I'm talking about the general stuff where we make things like this a habit. I've even seen distraction where a lot of us guys, and if I'm being honest, I've probably been guilty of this a couple of times in the past myself, but where a really attractive woman walks in the room and we're just oh my God, our attention just goes to that, and pretty much throughout the rest of the show, or at least throughout the song or the next few songs, our attention is on that. And things like that and other things, happen on stage all the time that are distractions, or that tend to distract us from doing what we're supposed to be doing, like focusing on the music, making sure that the band is tight, and just focusing on the overall show. But as a professional musician, just make sure you try to avoid these distractions as much as possible. Now, right before we get to the next thing, if you're getting value out of this video so far, do me a quick favor and hit the like button on this video. That helps with the YouTube algorithms and helps this video get shared and things like that. So go ahead and do that now. Now, another thing that you should never do on stage, and this is kind of one of my pet peeves, a little bit of a pet peeve anyway, is impede on other musicians' solos. Now, this happens when another musician in the band is taking a solo. Let's say the guitar player is taking a solo, and some of the other instrumentalists, like the keyboard player or the drummer or the bass player, is overplaying them and playing all of these complex melodies and rhythms over what they're playing and essentially soloing themselves, impeding on that musician's solo. Listen to me very closely. When another musician is soloing, your job is to provide a foundation for them to solo over. Nothing else. Really, get out of the way of other musicians' solos. When they're soloing, make sure you're trying to provide a foundation, a solid foundation, and that you're not doing too much. We tend to focus on all of these complex, fancy chords and runs and all of that kind of stuff, and we don't even know how to tailor them when somebody else's turn to solo comes up. You got to be able to back off on all of that stuff. Keyboard players, drummers, bass players, guitar players, even vocalists. You got to focus on giving the person who is soloing their just due. Now, another thing to never do on stage is not be ready when songs are called. as the MD, if I count off a song and I'm counting in the tempo and saying we're about to start such and such song, and you say, wait, I'm not ready, or I look over and I see you fiddling with your instrument, or you're distracted doing something else, like, oh my God, what are you doing? You gotta be ready to go from song to song very quickly. You have to have this thing on stage where you seem like you're focused on the show, or you at least appear to be focused on the show. That's what happens with a lot of these bands, a lot of times where there's a lot of space between their songs. They're like looking at the set list, like, oh, what are we going to do next? And all of this kind of stuff, because they're not ready to go to the next song. As an instrumentalist on stage, as a vocalist on stage, you got to be ready to go to the next song, and you got to be ready to go to that song when the songs are called out. And I know a lot of these gigs that we do nowadays are like fill-in gigs where you're showing up and nobody sent you a set list. It's just like show up. So there's a little bit of give and take with that, because you kind of have to do that while you're on stage. I mean, you get there 15 minutes before the gig and then the gig starts. It's like, okay, what song are we doing next? It's just like a show up and play. So I understand situations like that. But again, generally speaking, this is something you want to avoid at all costs. You got to be ready to, when songs are called, you got to be ready to hit them on the money. And another thing you got to avoid doing on stage is making your mistakes noticeable. So a lot of musicians really need to learn the art of recovery from mistakes. Like, this seems to be like a forgotten thing nowadays. A lot of musicians get lost in their mistakes. They make a mistake, and I've seen people like get mad at themselves on stage and be like, they're playing something, make a mistake, and they're like, I was like, dude, like, why are you doing that right now? It's not that big of a deal. You got to focus on recovering from mistakes very well so that they're not noticeable to the stage or to the people that are on the dance floor or the crowd. Most people are not going to notice most of those things anyway, especially if they're tiny mistakes. So you missing a note here and there is not that big of a deal. It's not nothing to get all up in arms about, or, you know, jump up and wave your hands and get angry and all of that stuff about. You got to recover from these mistakes well, and you got to do them in a way that's not noticeable. If you make a mistake, just get right back on it's like falling off the horse. Just get right back on. You make a mistake, just get right back on, man. Just recover. Just keep going to, you know, what it is that you were doing, or going through what you were doing. And also, that involves not making other band members' mistakes noticeable. I see this a lot as well. Like when somebody else makes a mistake and you're playing, it's like, oh, like, what are you doing? Like, that's not necessary. If somebody makes a mistake, especially if it's something small, just overlook it. You know, they're probably going to recover and they're probably going to get back on the horse, so to speak. So you don't have to make this big deal out of it and then make it noticeable again to the audience or people who are looking at the band. And if we're honest, a lot of that has to do with ego, which I'm not going to get too much into right now. But, you know, we do tend to hold this ego thing when somebody else messes up. It's like, what are you doing? Like, I've never made a mistake. What are you doing? Like, you know, we tend to be that way. So you got to stop making your mistakes and other people's mistakes noticeable on stage. And speaking of ego, that's something that's crucially important, and it's really about having a good attitude and how you deal with others. And it's so important that I've done an entire video on it, and I've done a series of videos on similar things, and you can check out that video and that series right now.